welcome to the Scrap Zone. This is Julie, and I wanted to give you a few assembly tips on how to create these beautiful cards. I specifically chose this one card because I can walk you through how to create the sunflower, the poppy, and the rose. But the first thing we have to do is put together the card base. This one here is a 5x7. I've used Toffee cardstock. I've cut it on my paper trimmer, and then I've just gone ahead and I've scored it. So you're just going to simply fold this in half on the score line to create your 5x7 card. Once that's done, I've gone ahead and I've sanded very lightly the edges of the cards, because you know that the cardstock has a white core, and I thought I'd take advantage of that. It just gives it a really nice rustic kind of look to it. So as you can see, I'm just running my sand block just along the edges of the card. The next step for this card is to emboss the top piece. So there's a layered piece on all of the cards, and it's been sand distressed as well. I wanted to talk about this embossing folder in particular because it gave me trouble, and I really wanted to use it and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So this embossing folder, the wood grain, runs along the card grain of your cardstock, and it did this. It actually ripped my cardstock, and I was like, oh no, I really want to use this embossing folder. What's going on here? So I'm not sure if it's just because it's running along the grain of the cardstock, but this has happened to me, and I just wanted to share and make sure that if it happens to you, we can totally fix this. So how did I fix this? I did two things. I did run my sanding block on the embossed side of my folder just to take a little bit of the edge off, and it still ripped my cardstock. So I thought, okay, now what? Well, I just used a standard printed piece of paper. It's just white paper, and I sandwiched my cardstock inside this white paper to protect it, if you wish. And then I went ahead and I embossed it, and there you go. No more ripping. So this is a really good tip if you are running into this particular situation for any of the folders. They're great because they emboss really deeply, but sometimes they just are a little bit too aggressive, right? Another thing you need to pay attention to when you're creating these cards is that all of the cards that I've done are using cardstock, and they're using the dark side of the cardstock. So here you've got the toffee cardstock, and then you've got the light color at the back and the darker color at the top. I want to have the emboss print on the dark side. So you have to pay attention when you're putting it into your embossing folder. And the way to figure out if it's front or back, you'll see that there's the Close to My Heart logo right at the front of your embossing folder. And then the bumps, if you want, or the impressions are at the back. So then you put in your cardstock, and when you run it through, you're going to have the dark side embossed, and then you can sand it off. And that was the important part, because I wanted to sand off the top to reveal the really pretty wood grain of the embossing folder. So I've kind of gone ahead off camera and assembled the first stage of the base card. And as you can see, my embossing of the cardstock worked beautifully, and I just sandwiched it inside of just a simple piece of, well, this is scratch paper, as you can see, inside my embossing folder, and I was able to create it without any tears. So this is a good tip if you run into that particular problem. The other thing that I've gone ahead and I've done is I've used 3D foam tape to give this a little bit of dimension, and this is going to serve as my base. So we're going to move right along into the assembly here, and I'm going to talk to you about how to put together this beautiful sunflower. So the sunflower itself, you've got 3 bases, you've got 2 leaves, and the centerpieces. The bases, 2 of them are identical in size, and then you've got one that is slightly smaller. all 3 pieces, and they've all been ink distress. The next thing you're going to do, and this is pretty simple, you're just going to pinch the leaves, the little petals, I mean. You're just going to pinch them up. I'm simply squeezing these upwards. That's all I'm doing, just to give them a little bit of dimension. So you're going to do this for all 3 pieces. So the next step, we're going to ink distress just a tiny little bit on the tips with Espresso ink. It just ties in the centerpiece. Very, very lightly, just at the tip. Less is more in this case. It just gives it another dimension. And when you put them all together, as you can see, I'm not adding a whole lot of ink. I'm using pretty much what is on my dauber. So we're going to put these together. You can use, it depends on your preference. I definitely use the thicker 3D foam dots or the 3D foam tape. And if you're using the dots, I would use just a couple of them. I find that using 3 works best. Right? So you're going to go ahead and assemble your flower base. And yes, I am totally throwing those pieces on the floor. And you need to offset them just so very lightly. Just kind of play with it and turn it around. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to put this one right on top. And there you go. The next thing you're going to want to do is the center. And sometimes I love to show the white cardstock, the white core, and sometimes I don't. And I just find that for this particular center, it looked nicer when I added a little bit of ink. So I usually use the same ink color. I work on a little post-it note pad. You can actually work directly on this multi-mat if you want, because it wipes up really quickly, but I've just gotten to the habit of using these small little post-it notes. So it just gives it definitely more dimension, and it's just a little darker. I really like using this Bonding Memories pen because even if it bleeds through, and I'm just using my mat here because I'm going to wipe it, even if it bleeds through, it actually dries clear. So that's a good thing. And you just go ahead and you put these 2 pieces together, and you'll see that I've got a little bit of glue, and I just kind of work that into my piece. Now this will be the last piece that goes right on top, and I just found that it was a little flat, so I decided to give it a little bit of embossing. And you know, you don't need a lot of fancy tools. This is a must-have, my embossing folder. I've used it for so many things, and I just find that it works. I just run it on the back side, and it's kind of breaking the fibers, and it's just giving it a little bit of a round kind of button look. And then you'd go ahead and use, again, pop dots, the standard size, not the thin ones. And you would go ahead and put that on the front or on the top of your petal, right? So here we go. And it just gives it that perfect dimension and the 3D look that I was looking for. Oh, it's not quite in the center. There we go. There we go. So let's move right along to the leaves, which are these ones right here that are with the sunflower. I'm going to run a line right in the center of your leaf using your bone folder and a little mat. And as you can see, my mat has been well used and loved. So you're just going to run down the center, and then you're going to fold your leaf in half. Right? So both of them. You're just going to fold them right in half on that score line. And then you are going to accordion fold. So pinch, and this can be a little tricky, but you just pinch it and just accordion fold the leaf all the way to the other side. So from end to end. Right? And I'm really pinching this together. So it's been folded in half, right? So fold your leaf in half on the score line and then pinch it together in an accordion fold from top to bottom. And don't be afraid to squish it. It's just cardstock, right? So we are going to open this up. And right away you see the leaf has got dimension, and it's just so much more prettier than flat, right? So it's got all this dimension. So to give it even more dimension, I've gone ahead and I've ink distressed with the same color. I usually ink distress with the same color, so tone on tone. So I'm hiding the white core on the edges, and I'm rubbing it right on top to show all of those creases that we've just done. When you're going to be putting this on your base card, and here's my base card, make sure that it's opening the right way. I would kind of like start pre-positioning them, right? And this is definitely not going to be a post office friendly card because it's got so many dimensions. But just try and line up your pieces so that they're within your card. And I found that this particular one here, by adding just a little bit of liquid glass at the back, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And my liquid glass, I tend to, when I'm working on these types of project, I tend to put a pin in it because I don't know about you, but sometimes it clogs up and it stops the flow. So I just put a little white pin in there, and I also keep my bottle laying on the surface on the side. I don't put it up when I'm using it because it just, again, prevents the flow from going. So if I'm putting my leaves together here, right, so if I'm putting them like this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a little bit of liquid glass, and I'm going to position it where I think it should go, and then I'll put the second one, again where I think it should go. And that way, when you're ready to put them down, this piece is all inclusive, right? So I'm going to just drop that on there. So before we move on to the rose and the poppy, I thought I'd move on and explain to you how I did the foliage on this card. So we've got a few, we've gone through how we did the ones for the sunflowers, and this one here is cut out of sweet leaf, and I've just gone ahead and scored just a tiny little line at the center, or on the center, of each of the leaves. And I'm just using my bone folder, and it's not really the center, but you know, it's a leaf. It's supposed to be, it's not perfect, right? So I've gone and I've done that, and I've done that for this one as well. And you'll see just by doing this simple little vein line at the center, it gives it dimension. Again, it gives it a little bit of a 3D dimension. So this wood here is with Sweet Leaf. So you would do the little vein line with your bone folder, and then same as before, you just pinch the leaves up. So using the Sweet Leaf ink to ink distress the white edges and making the color pop. All right, so you'll do that for both. So again, pinch up each of the little leaves from this stem or from this branch. And they are small, so they are finicky. And then I just rest it on the tip of my finger and I gently add a little bit of ink on each of the leaves. So that's how we create those. You are going to get inky. As you can see, right, my fingers are getting a little dirty. So we're going to do the same thing here. This one's actually easier, so if you want to start with the larger one, it gives you a feel for what you're doing. And we're going to use the ink from this one, which is New England Ivy. And we're just basically running it along to hide the white. And that is how this is done. All right, so you've got this one here and this one. So we're going to move right along and I'll show you a few tips on how to put together this really pretty rose. But it does come in a lot of pieces. So here are the pieces that it comes in. And you have to pay attention to this small little notch here, which is what is going to glue the petal together. In my Cricut Design Space file, I included a few more center pieces because I thought that it needed a little bit more fullness in the center. So the first thing you're going to do when you put these together is you are going to ink distress all of the edges of the petals using the same color ink, and in this case it's pomegranate, so we're using pomegranate ink and pomegranate cardstock. You are going to get very inky doing this. All right, so that is step number one, is to ink distress all of the shapes. And the next step is to emboss them all. A lot of people ask me, do you use fancy tools? And I was like, yep, I use this fancy tool. I think everybody's got one. So you're going to take your first piece, which is the largest piece, you're going to flip it over from the dark side, if that's the side that you actually inked, and you're just going to run along the leaves or the petals, right? So we'll do that for all of the pieces. All right, so all of these have now been inked and embossed. I am going to use liquid glass, and again I'm keeping my little pin in here just to make sure that it flows, and I'm leaving my bottle on its side because I just find that it doesn't clog up as much. So when you start this, it's easiest to start with the biggest one because you're going to repeat this for all of them, and I found that it was easier to kind of fold each of the petal onto each other. So you're kind of giving them, you're training them to stick together, because this little tab is very small and it forms somewhat of a little cone. So we're going to put these together at the tab. I don't know if you can see this, and we are going to hold it down. So hopefully my liquid glass is going to cooperate. I'm going to put just a tiny, ever so tiny piece of liquid glass, and I'm going to hold it. And as you are holding it, you can use the tip of a brush and curl them in. I just figured since I had to hold it, I might as well keep shaping my flower. but it does stick together, and you may get some overlapping. Don't worry about that. That's going to be just fine. So I'm going to show you that one more time. So you're going to fold each of your leaf or petals. I have a hard time with that one, huh? Each of your petals, you're going to fold them onto each other. You're going to give this little tab a bit of a pinch, and then you're going to fold it and glue it right on the back side. So just a tiny little bit of glue, and I just put my finger on it, and then I use the back of my brush. You can use a pencil, I guess, but I just found that because of the finish it rolls nice. So this is piece number 2. It's a little bit of a process to put together, but it is so beautiful when it's all done. So again, you're going to pinch this, and then we're going to glue it together. I'm showing you all of the pieces because they're kind of funny when they're separated. Just giving it a little bit of a twist. So see, this one really looks like a little cone. So you've got this one, and then the last one, which is the same process. You kind of fold them onto each other, and then you give this one a little bit of a pinch. And by now you've probably figured out that I am a left-handed crafter, so it may be completely the other side for you. So this is how this one comes together. Like, it truly does need to be pinched. And again, rolling out the petals and putting it down. Now these ones here, I've actually used the smaller paintbrush, and I've rolled it onto it because they're the center of the rose, and I've gone ahead and I've rolled it to create that beautiful shape. And I've got 5, and I just added a few, and then some of them I just roll them out. And you are going to play with this as you are assembling your rose. So now they're all shaped, and they are all ready to go. So the biggest one is the bottom, and we are going to add some liquid glass all on the inside, and then we're going to put the second piece on top, and we are going to overlap the petals, and I'm just holding that in, and as I hold it in, I tend to start shaping my flower. You can actually use the inside and the embossing pad here and just really squish it in. So the next size, and you've got to notice that it's quite a bit of a tip to it, so it's going to go right in the center. So you definitely need glue right in the center, and you're going to pop that one in there as well. And you're going to rotate it so that it's kind of overlapping or in between the other ones that you've just put in. This is the center. So again, it's quite the little tip you've got, but that's what gives it the 3-dimension, and it's really pretty. Oh, see, it came apart, but that's okay. I'm just gonna squish it back together, and this will probably happen to you as well. I just didn't hold it long enough. Right? So we're going to put this one inside, and because we are using liquid glass, it will move on you, which is good because you can start positioning your rose as you're putting it together. So you may need to let this dry a little because the liquid glass doesn't dry right away, which is a good thing because you can position your petals, but it will need to dry just ever so slightly. So then you've got these little centerpieces that I've gone ahead and I've used the back side or the handle piece of my small brush, and the idea is to kind of put them one inside of each other to form the centerpiece. So go ahead and put, you know, a generous amount of liquid glass and then just start putting these little pieces inside. I actually started with the rose on most of my flowers because I found that it was kind of finicky and it needed some drying time. So this was the original file and it had 2 of these pieces, and I felt like it needed a little bit more. So I cut a few extra pieces, and that's up to you. It just depends on how you like the fullness of your flower. But I just added a few more pieces. And I also found that sometimes flipping this little, or pinching the little pointy end in was easier to glue down. So here's the leaf. And you know, sometimes I just stop and I don't need extra ones, but I'm definitely going to let this dry, and then I'm going to manipulate it a little bit more. And if I see any white bits, I'm going to go back and add a little bit more ink to this flower. But this is how it comes together, and as you can see, I didn't use all of the centerpieces, but definitely you'll know if it's full enough when you see it. But I thought that this was just fine the way it was. I'm going to show you how to put together the leaf part of the rose. So very much like all of the other ones, I've gone ahead and I've just drawn a vein line in the center, and then you see all these little tips here. I've just gone ahead and I've traced from each tip down into the leaf itself. You don't really see it now, but when I add the ink, you will see it. So I'm basically just drawing in the veining of the leaf. So I start with the center, and then I just go and I add from the out to the inside of that first piece, or first one that I've drawn in. And same as the other ones, I fold the leaf in half, and then I pinch the first one. The first one's the hardest to do, and then I just accordion fold the entire thing, and I give it a good pinch. And we are going to use Fern ink because this is Fern cardstock to give it that extra color that we're looking for. So you just go ahead and open it up, and I usually start at the edges, work my way up, and give it a nice distress. So the next step is to put together this really cute poppy. So how do we do that? All right, so let's start off with, we are going to ink distress the edges of the petals. And this piece here, you will have 1, 2, 3, 4 large petals, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 smaller petals with a center base to glue it all on. So I've gone ahead and I've ink distress very quickly all of the tips of the petals. Once you've ink distressed all of the petals, you're going to go ahead and emboss the back side. Now this one, I've actually added a little bit more pressure than I did for the rose. The rose, I just gently rubbed the back side, but for the poppy, I've actually gone and pressed quite hard, and it gives it a little bit of dimension and creasing when you press harder. So that's how that texture was created. So I'm really rubbing along the back side using the back of my bone folder, but I am putting a little bit of pressure on the leaf or the petal. And I always do this without holding on to the piece. This one I'll give it a little bit more, because if you try and hold on to the piece, you will end up tearing your petal, and that would be very sad. So we've gone ahead and we've embossed all of them, and then the next step is to shape each petal. So you'll fold this one over, add a tiny bit of liquid glass, and fold this one right on top and hold it. And as you're holding it, again, I like to play with my petals and give them a little bit of a shape, but it gives you a little base. And there you have it. They're all ready to be glued to this base. So what I found the easiest way to do this is to start, you definitely are going to start with your 4 larger ones, and then you've got your 4 small ones here. So the 4 larger ones, you're going to put one little bit of liquid glass, and you are going to position this almost like halfway down in the center, and you're going to hold it. The next one, again, a little bit of liquid glass, and then you are going to touch the first one as far as the center goes, and then this is where it gets a little stuck sometimes. So as you can see, they are both touching each other. So we're going to try and do the same thing in the space. And it can get a little tricky to put them together. I know some people like to use hot glue, but I don't like to burn my fingers. So I just use liquid glass, and I'm a little patient. So this is the last one, and you really have to squeeze it in there. And again, it's paper, right? So don't let the paper win. Show the paper who's boss. So this is how the first 4 large ones will look like. And at this point here, I let it dry a little bit, because if we start putting these one in, it's going to fall apart and it's just not going to be fun. So I move on to the centerpiece, and again, as I've said before, I like to use just a post-it note pad when I ink distress these smaller pieces, and when they're tiny like this, I actually lay them flat. For these particular pieces, I did ink distress both sides. And as I'm playing with this piece, I'm allowing the base of my flower to dry. Alright, so these have been ink distressed. I'm going to emboss them ever so slightly. So I'm going to pull this piece in, just pulling from the outer edge into the center. And then if I use the tip of my brush, I'm kind of creating a little cup. And I further pinch it together because these are going to go for my center. So I just play with it to kind of form this little cup. I'm going to go ahead and add a tiny little bit of glue in the center, right? And then I'm going to use the back side of my brush, and I'm just going to push that in. and pull up on the shape all around it. And I'm going to let that dry because that's going to be my centerpiece. So by this time, your base should be dry enough to add these leaves inside. And these ones here, you almost have to pinch them down because you're going to put them overlapping the larger ones that are put down. But you put just a tiny little bit of glue and you go right in the center and you push it down. So this is the last piece. And you're just going to squeeze that end. And sometimes I just use the tip of my brush to make sure that they're all inside. I'll put a nice generous amount of liquid glass and add the centerpiece and give it a little push. So there you go. This is your poppy. I'll let that dry a little bit and then I'll squish it down a little bit further. So this is how you assemble the flowers to create this card. And I'll go ahead now and I'll put the card together. I'll just give these guys a little time to dry. So the next thing we're going to do is assemble this card, and the first thing you want to do is put down the sentiment. This particular sentiment was created in the Cricut Design Space file using a particular font, and if you don't have the font, I do include it in the file. Or you can also reach into your thin cuts. This high there would fit perfectly here, and we've got happy birthday and all different types of thin cuts that actually fit the same size because I kind of based it on those. So the first thing you want to do is glue down your sentiment, and again I'm using the bonding memory pen because even if you go over and it bleeds, it dries clear on the other side. Alright, so I've gone ahead and I've positioned the sentiment, and we're going to start assembling this card. The first piece that goes up is the sunflower, and we're going to just kind of do a dry run if you want, and we're going to follow it through with the darkest leaf, and then these little guys here, just to see how it's all going to lay out. And then now that these are dry, you can go ahead and give them a little bit of a shaping. This one's going to go right here, and then the rose is going to go here. So we're kind of getting it together. So we're going to add, again, I find it a lot easier to put the leaves to the flower and then put the flower down. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. The last little pieces are these twigs, and I just usually go ahead and add a little bit of liquid glass and then sneak them underneath. There's one. And two. Now you're going to have to give this a chance to dry, right? Because there's a lot of dimensions going on here, but you're going to have to give it just a tiny bit of chance to dry and position properly. The rows I found tend to move a lot because it's so dimensional, and I actually went ahead once it was completely dried and I added a few little pop dots underneath these two leaves, and it just stabilized it nicely. And the entire thing is completed with a few of these really pretty gold glitter gems. I've used the large ones and the small ones and just randomly put them on this entire card. So I hope that this was really helpful for you to put it together. I know that there's a lot of steps, but once it's done, it is absolutely beautiful, and it's a great project. Like if you want to escape and do something pretty, this is the project for you. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon.